All right, so here we are. We were in Daniel chapter 10 last week. Remember that? And we started out, Daniel was actually praying. And what happened in the middle of his prayer? He got interrupted, right? By a man who had eyes like fire and feet like fine brass, and his voice was the sound of many waters. And remember, he was with some other guys, and did they see what he saw? No, they did not. Right? All they heard were loud noises. So Daniel falls into this trance, and he's got a vision going on, and he had been in the middle of prayer and fasting. And so we talked a bit about that last week, and so now we'll dive into the rest of chapter 10. Chapter 10 is actually pretty short, but we should have done it last week because it would have been a good Halloween-y kind of lesson. But we're a week late, so we'll still do it anyway. So let's turn to Daniel 10, and we're going to look at verses 10 through 21. So somebody read me 10 through 14, and then somebody else can read 15 through 21.
I will take 10 to 14.
All right, nice and loud.
Suddenly a hand touched me, which made me tremble on my knees and on the palm of my hands. And he said to me, O Daniel, man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak to you, and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. While he was speaking this word to me, I stood trembling. Then he said to me, do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand, and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I have been left alone there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for their vision refers to many days yet to come.
Okay, and 15 through 21. Okay.
When he had spoken to me according to these words, I turned my face toward the ground and speechless. And behold, one in the likeness of the Son of Man touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I said to him who stood before me, O my Lord, by reason of the vision things have come upon me, and I retain no strength. How can my Lord's servant talk with my Lord? For now no strength remains in me, and no breath is left in me. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. And he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And when he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, do you know why I come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I am through with him, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, the prince.
Okay, so interesting stuff going on. So Daniel is going to get helped off the ground by an angel, right? And what does the let's see, the angel. So when people encounter angels, what do they normally do? You don't need to look there, but what happens when people normally encounter angels in the Bible?
You gotta do not be afraid.
Yeah, right, exactly. Because people are what? They're afraid, right? Because these angels are big and awesome looking, and there is something about them that causes people to fear. Well, in verse 12, we kind of get the typical angel response: do not be afraid. So Daniel knows up front, hey, don't be afraid. Now, what's the angel's message going to be about?
What will happen to you?
To your people, right? So to who? Who's the focus of the message?
Jews.
The Jews, right? So it's Daniel's people. And that's important when we figure out the context, right, of the whole message. Because as we look at Bible interpretation, context, context, context is what matters. Okay? So what we see here is some interesting stuff about what's going on behind the scenes. So Daniel starts to pray. And when was the messenger released to go to see Daniel?
21 days ago, apparently.
Yeah, on the first day that Daniel starts to pray. So Daniel starts to pray, and God sends the message. Messenger. By the way, angel in Greek is angelos, which just means messenger. Okay? So when you read in the New Testament and it says, it's an angel. Yes, it could be an angel, but for example, in the book of Revelation, when it talks to the angel of the seventh church, to the angel of the church at Sardis, to the angel of the church at Smyrna, we could really just read that as the messenger of the church at Sardis, and who is typically the messenger in a church. It's usually the pastor or the priest or whatever you want to call him. So not every time Scripture uses angel, which it transliterates from angelos in the Greek, does it necessarily mean a supernatural being. It doesn't have to. In this case, it's obviously a supernatural being, right? Because they appear, they show up, Daniel falls down. Every time he falls down, he gets lifted back up by one of the angels, and the angel tells him, okay, here's what's going on. So 21 days prior, and why did it take him so long to get there? I mean, look, you're an angel. You can do supernatural stuff, right? Maybe you can't just pop in and out of our reality, but you would think it wouldn't take you, longer than it would take us to say fly from here to Singapore. So what happened? He said, from the day that you first set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before God, your words were heard. And I have come because of your words. So Daniel sets out in this prayer not only to humble himself, but he's also trying to understand God's plan. Okay? So the result of this is that an angel is going to show up and he's going to tell Daniel what God's plan is. In chapter 11, when we get into that, I hope you like history because it's a lot of this and that, and the other guy, and this guy, this happens and that happens. But what does it say in verse 13?
So the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, and behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the king of Persia.
Okay, so we have our little angel. He's taken off. We'll just give him some wings. He's going, and remember, we're here because of the artwork. Okay, there's Bible study and there's art class. You get credits for both. And while he's there, what happens? You have a different haircut.
Give him a mullet.
Fine, mullet. That makes you happy. What happens to him? What happens to the angel? What's it say?
Runs into opposition.
He runs into opposition. From what's the opposition called?
The prince of the kingdom of Persia.
The prince of the kingdom of Persia. Do we think that this heavenly messenger has run into an earthly obstacle? Okay, we're kind of like, okay. Okay, so if they don't run into an earthly obstacle, what does he run into? Who is the prince of Persia? And by the way, how long does he struggle? He struggles with the Prince of Persia for 21 days, right? Until what happens?
Well,
Oh, until Michael shows up. Okay, so now you got Michael shows up. Michael's got great here. So now Michael's here, and then he probably brings his sword. And he shows up, and then that lets this guy get to Daniel. Right? So what's going on? Who's Michael? Like, he just tells Daniel, hey, until Michael shows up. So Daniel's obviously supposed to know, or does know, who Michael is. Okay. Michael is described as how? As what? One of the chief princes. Does anybody have anything different? So that does imply, right? This is plural, okay? So that does imply there are more than one chief prince. Are these really princes we're talking about? Rachel's kind of like she's just barely shaking her head no. What do we think we're talking about? Angels.
who's that?
So we have Angel 1. We've got Michael, one of the chief princes, so one of the chief angels, right? And we know him to be described as an archangel, so one of the highest level of angels. And then we've got the Prince of Persia, who is probably an angel playing for the other team. Okay? Because what else is going to stand in the way of an angel? It's not going to be anything earthly, it's not going to be anything human. So we've got this good angel and a bad angel kind of going at it. Now, let's talk about angels. Because people tend to think that if you've got an angel on one side, what do you have on the other side? Ah, okay. So, when we read the scripture, how are angels normally described? People who see angels see what?
Man.
Yeah. So they see a physical presence, right? When an angel shows up, when the angel Gabriel shows up to Mary or to Elizabeth, she sees a man, right? When angels show up in the book of Genesis, they're men, right? So there's a physical body. Well, when we read about demons in scripture and possession, right? When we see it all through the gospels, what do we see?
In people, but not necessarily as anything else.
Do we ever see something that possesses someone else as a physical physical presence, physical body? No. Every time we see a demon in scripture, the demon is possessing a guy, right? Like when we go to the Gadarenes, you know, and there's this guy who's living in the caves and he throws off chains and does all this stuff. The demons come out of him and go into what? Remember? Pigs, right? And then what do the pigs do? They drown themselves. So they spike the pork belly market. And it would be a good time to be investing in pigs, unless you were a Jew, of course, when you can't eat pigs. So, angels have bodies, demons don't. Angels, we know, were created, right? Created at the beginning. Oops, I guess I should check. Demons don't appear to have been created at the beginning, but they desperately seek they do know what their destiny is, right? Remember that demon that Jesus is talking to, and the demon recognizes Jesus and he says, "Hey, why are you here before the appointed time?" And I think that's Matthew 8:29. Okay. So we talked about they have bodies. They definitely appear to be guardians. And that's in Matthew 18:10. They are pretty nasty. Well, I guess they're both pretty nasty, but think about when Adam and Eve are thrown out of the Garden of Eden. What happens? What does God do? Throws you out of the Garden of Eden, and to block the way to the Garden of Eden, who does God install?
An angel with a sword.
Yeah. Now, do you think an angel with a sword was really necessary to stop Adam and Eve from getting to the back in the garden? Probably not. So there may be something more going on there. Perhaps what he's really trying to do is keep Satan and Satan's minions out of the garden to get that fruit from the tree of eternal life and taking it out of the garden, right? Maybe. So I would just say, when you look at this, there's a difference between the angels that are still with God and the fallen angels. And we should think of them as opposing, equal powers, right? Demons are not the same thing, I don't think. You will hear people talk and say, well, if it's not an angel, it's a demon. Well, because of the whole physical presence here, but not physical presence here, I tend to think that the demons actually are something, I think there's something else. So this angel, the original angel who's coming, apparently is equally matched with this guy. In fact, so much so that he needs Michael to show up and give him the extra boost he needs to get past him so he can get to Daniel. How is this guy described? The Prince of Persia. What is that? And later on in the text, there's another prince mentioned. Prince of Greece, right? So it potentially suggests that these guys have some kind of, at least at whatever level this guy is, there is some sort of geographic or empire or government related responsibility. Because the guy who's responsible for Persia as an area or an empire is not the same guy who's responsible for Greece. And so we get this little bit of insight, but really not much more than this. So we don't really know anything more about it than what we see here. In fact, the Prince of Greece is going to come, and the angel says this will happen when he's gone forth. Well, that doesn't, Daniel's getting this vision in the time of the Persians. So perhaps the Prince of Greece is going to come forth from the angel's perspective immediately, but from Daniel's perspective, it's a couple hundred years, right? Let's see. Okay. So it does make you wonder, well, is there a Prince of the United States? Is there a Prince of the United Nations on the bad guy's side? Don't know, but potentially. All right. So it is talking, though, this is one of the places where we get to understand a little bit about spiritual warfare. And I know you guys understand this, but let's look at Ephesians 6:13. There are 6, 10 through 13. And this is the last part of where Paul is talking about putting on the whole armor of God. And he says, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in his power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. And what those words mean in the Greek is that when we are wrestling in spiritual warfare, we're not wrestling against other people. We are wrestling against what's going on in the spiritual realm. So there is stuff going on in the spiritual realm about us that we may or may not be able to see. Sometimes, like Daniel here, he's getting an insight into it. But I think there's stuff happening all about us all the time that we just don't see. What's the defense against them? Well, it's verse 13. Therefore, take up the whole armor of God that you may be able to withstand the evil days, and having done all to stand. So the question you'd ask is, for a soldier, when do you put on your armor?
Before going to battle.
Before going into battle, right? That's when you make sure that you're prayed up, you're studied up, you're covered by your armor. It's not when you're in the middle of the battle. It's really hard to be in the middle of the battle and say, oh, hey, you know what? I forgot my chest piece, or I forgot my helmet, or darn, I wish I hadn't left my gun back in the barracks, right? Not terribly helpful at that point. So you're supposed to put on your armor of God when times are good and you're preparing for that spiritual battle, because you never know when it might come. The other interesting episode with angels takes place in the life of Elisha. You remember, Elisha is the prophet who takes over Elijah's job. So Elijah gets kind of raptured and taken out. Elisha picks up the mantle. And in 2 Kings chapter 6, it describes this incident in verses 8 through 17. And it says, now the king of Syria was making war against Israel. And he consulted with his servant, saying, my camp will be in such and such a place. And the man of God, so Elisha, sent to the king of Israel, saying, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are coming down there. So the Syrians are making war against Israel. Elisha is getting knowledge from God about what's going on, and he's listening in the camp of the king of Assyria, or the king of Syria, and he's telling the king of Israel what's going on. He said, hey, look, there's from a very reliable source, which happens to be the king of Syria. Don't go here, because that's where those guys are going to be. Okay? Then the king of Israel sent someone to the place of which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him, and he was watchful there, not just once or twice. So this happens multiple times, right? The king of Syria is making all these plans. We know, Elisha's listening in. He tells the king of Israel, and every time he gets thwarted. Therefore, the heart of the king of Syria was greatly troubled by this thing, and he called his servants and said to them, will you not show me which one of us is for the king of Israel? So which one of you guys in my inner council is spying on me and telling the king of Israel what's going on? Because that's the only thing he can think of to happen. And one of his servants said, none, my lord, but O king. But Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So he said, go and see where he is, that I may send and get him. And that's pretty good insight for this Syrian guy who's on the wrong side, to know somehow that Elisha is a prophet and is telling the king of Israel what's going on here. So they go and they try and find Elisha, and was told to him, saying, surely he is in Dothan. Therefore the king sent the horses and chariots and a great army there, and they came by night and surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, and there was an army surrounding the city with horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, alas, my master, what shall we do? And he answered, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed and said, Lord, I pray that you may open his eyes that he may see. Then the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, so the servant, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So Elisha is getting this view into what's going on kind of behind the spiritual curtain. And he's looking at the mountaintop saying, hey, we're good, we're fine. We got all this armor behind us. The poor servant has no idea what's happening. He looks out and he sees the army below him. And he says, we're in trouble. We better get out of here. He says, no, we're fine. So it's really interesting. I think in that same episode later on, they wake up and there's a whole army of Syrians who are dead. And basically it turns out that one angel killed 185,000 Syrians in one night. So when you think of the power of these guys, and then you say, well, what's it take to stop one of them? It's obviously somebody or a being of equal power. So there's some interesting stuff going on. I want to read another one to you. This is a story that was in one of Billy Graham's books. And it said, the Reverend John G. Patton, a missionary in the New Hebrides Islands, tells a thrilling story involving the case of protective care of angels. Hostile natives surrounded his mission headquarters one night, intent on burning the patrons out and killing them. John Patron and his wife prayed all night that God would deliver them. When daylight came, they were amazed to see the attackers unaccountably leave. They thanked God for delivering them. A year later, the chief of the tribe was converted to Jesus Christ, and Mr. Patton, remembering what had happened, asked the chief what had kept him and his men from burning down the house and killing them. The chief replied in surprise, who were all those men you had with you? The missionary answered, there were no men there, just my wife and I. The chief argued that they had seen many men standing guard, hundreds of big men in shining garments with drawn swords in their hands. They seemed to circle the mission station so that the natives were afraid to attack. Only then did Mr. Patton realize that God had sent his angels to protect him. So that's actually a pretty cool story to have told, right? So we say, oh, angels, we think about Christmas time, and we think about the cherubs, and we think about them floating on clouds with harps, but angels are really bad dudes, right? And when Satan takes a third of the angels with him in the fall, right, there's a third of this big host of heavenly beings that are now on the wrong side of God, and they're what cause us trouble, I think. And it's hard, right? Because so many times people say, oh, well, there's this spiritual warfare going on in my life and things are just against me. And, sometimes you have to believe that, right? Sometimes, it does feel like that. And again, we don't necessarily have the answer. Sometimes people just make bad choices, right? And you can't blame spiritual warfare on bad choices that you make. So I think you got to be, on the one hand, pretty critical and honest with yourself to say, okay, am I really in a place like this because I made bad choices? Or, you know what, I'm trying to make good choices, and I think I'm making good choices, and yet things seem to be going against me. And maybe that's a time when you do have some spiritual warfare going on. But either way, putting on the armor of God and praying up in advance is what's key, right? That's what helps us get through difficult times. So, has anybody seen the movie Constantine?
With John Constantine?
Yeah, the one with Keanu Reeves. You never say any movie I bring up, you've never seen. So
I know the character though.
you know the character. Okay, all right. You know the character. All right. Okay. So it's about this guy. The premise is and I guess he's a Marvel guy. Is that
DC.
He's DC. Okay. But he's a guy who can see angels and demons on Earth when nobody else can. And there's this one scene in the movie where I think it's the female protagonist or whatever she's like, she doesn't believe anything he says. And I forget exactly what he does, but somehow he shows her what's going on around her. And it's this big reveal, shocking thing. And I sometimes wonder if somebody didn't come up to you and just kind of go like that, touch you, and you could really see what was happening around you. Would you react the same way, right? Because could be all this stuff, right, happening. Don't it? All right, so what's going to happen before this angel takes back off to deal with the Prince of Greece is there's going to be a history lesson. Except from Daniel's perspective, it's a prophecy lesson. So, for this, I may even have to turn the board sideways, because there may be art and charts involved.
And dragons, there will be dragons.
There could be. I am gonna draw a really bad map very quickly. Let's see here. Let's see here. All that. That's kind of a Persian Gulf. So here's Israel. Here's the Nile. And let's see. Over here is India. Yada yada yada. Okay, so remember back in the day when we were talking about the Greek Empire, and we talked about how Alexander dies and he divides it how?
You pretty much said give it to the strong.
He said, right, and who consider themselves the strongest? He's got 4 generals, right?
Well, thing, they're not equal ones, but
Correct. So what we have here, the 2 that we care about is Seleucus over here and Ptolemy down here. And these 2 guys are basically going to found dynasties. And this angel is going to tell us what's going to happen between the 2 dynasties. Now, sometimes people, so when is this actually going to occur? Well, when is the last book of the Old Testament end? About 400-ish BC, okay? All the stuff that we're going to hear about is stuff that happens between that time and New Testament times. So people often call this in biblical times the silent period, right? Because there's no prophets, there's no messages from God. And yet it's not really silent because Daniel gets the knowledge in advance of what's going to happen here. And so we're gonna talk through a little bit about that. And it's not long, it's 35 verses, but it's going to cover about 350 years of history or so. And so the outline for chapter 11 is verses 1 and 2 are going to be about the Persian Empire. Verses 3 and 4 about the Greeks. And then 5 through 35 is this Seleucid Ptolemy rivalry. And then 36 through 39, oops, not 63, 36. There's somebody who's going to show up, who's going to be called the willful king. And it's at that point that we're going to look at it and go, wait a minute. It looks like the focus has switched. Right? So remember when we talked a couple of weeks ago about the idea of dual prophecy, where you can see something that looks like it is fulfilled short term, and then you see something next to it, which looks like in the text is, it's 1, then 2. But in between, there's this big valley of stuff. Well, I think we've got another situation here like that between verses 35 and verses 36. And then 40 through 45 is kind of end times stuff. So we are obviously not going to get through a ton of this tonight, but we will get through, we'll see how much we can get through. So verses 1 through 4. It says, also in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Well, who is that speaking? Who was the I who stood up to confirm and strengthen him? The best way we think to read that is probably the last angel speaking. Okay, so if you just use like if you were just reading a normal book and you just read, oh, I did this, you would, and you didn't know who I was, you'd go back to the last person who spoke or was mentioned by subject, in the text and say, oh, well, it's got to be that, right? Well, I think that's what we should do here. So it's even I stood up and strengthened him. So somebody stands up and strengthens Darius the Mede, okay? Because God clearly decides or has desired for the Medo-Persian Empire to last for a certain period of time. And then he says, and now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th shall be far richer than all. By his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up against all he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great domain and do according to his will. And when he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken up and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not among his posterity, nor according to the dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be uprooted even for others besides these. So, we already had a little bit of this history chapter, right? This is remember the vision of the goat and the ram is Medo-Persia, and the goat comes across and he takes out the ram. And what we find here is he's talking about Darius and 3 kings that are going to arise after Darius. And these guys are named Cambyses, Cambyscs, Artaxerxes, Artaxerxes, and Darius the First, Hystaspes, Hystaspes. It's really kind of weird. Okay. Then, so that's 3 kings, and then it says a 4th king is going to arise, right? So these are the 3 kings in verse 2, and then the 4th king arises, and this 4th king is Xerxes. Xerxes the First. Okay? He's also known in the book of Esther. He's the guy in the book of Esther who is known as Ahasuerus, Haseurus. So if you're reading Esther, you're like, who is this king? Well, it's actually the same guy here as Xerxes the First. Okay? And in about 480 BC, he attacks Greece, which is this, by the way. So that's Greece. He's going to attack Greece, and he is going to use a land force, but he's also going to take a navy along. And in 480, the Greek fleet is going to completely destroy the Persian fleet at something called the Battle of Salamis, Salmis. If you ever get to, in fact, if you ever want, I've got like a bunch of CDs on sort of great battles in history that sort of turned the historical tide, right? And it goes all the way back to battles like this and talks about, okay, what happened. And I think this is one where the Greeks were outnumbered and the Persian navy comes in and this great storm comes and wipes out the whole fleet. So the Greeks are victorious. So, so the Greeks, of course, take it that the gods are on their side. They're partially right because God is on their side, not their gods. So it probably is. Yeah. So Xerxes retreats back across Asia Minor to Persia, but he leaves about 100,000 man army here. Well, that army actually gets wiped out by the Greeks. The Greeks come and Alexander takes those guys out. By the end of this, Alexander is moving towards the east and the Persians are in full retreat. So the Persian Empire falls, and then very clearly his kingdom, this great king that shall arise is, of course, Alexander. and his kingdom is going to be broken up by the four winds, and it's going to be these guys plus two others, Lysander and Cassander and Lysimachus. So they're kind of combined up in here, but it's really Ptolemy and Seleucus who are the big guns. Okay, so what you see now are references to the king of the north and the king of the south. Okay, and the important thing for us is you want to look at it from Israel's perspective. So Israel's here. So the king of the north are the Seleucids, and the king of the south are the Ptolemies. All right. So somebody read verses 5 through 8.
Okay. Also, the king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes, and he shall gain power over him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. And at the end of some years they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south shall go to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power for authority, and neither he nor his authority shall stand, but she shall be given up with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. But a branch from her root one shall arise in his place. He shall come with an army, and to the fortress of the king of the north, and do with them in prison. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold, and shall continue more years than the king of the north. Blessings.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot going on here. Okay, so now you got kings of the south getting bigger. A daughter of the king of the south is going to go to the king of the north and get united through marriage, but she's not going to retain the powers of the authority. And then what's going to happen is the king of the north and the king of the south are going to fight. So historically, what happens? Well, let's start out with the original two guys. Right? There's Ptolemy the first in the south and Seleucus the first in the north. In the south, Ptolemy the first dies, and it's his son, Ptolemy the second, and a guy known as Philadelphus, who becomes the ruler. Okay, this is roughly 270-ish BC, and under him, this is when the great library of Alexandria is at its peak. And it's also when what we call the Septuagint version of the Bible is commissioned. It's that version, sometimes you'll see it written LXX, which in Roman numerals means 70. And it's called that because, historically it was believed that it's either, depends on who you listen to, it's either 70 or 72 Hebrew scholars and rabbis get together and convert the Old Testament scrolls from Hebrew, which nobody was speaking anymore, it's kind of like Latin in the church, nobody really speaks it anymore, to Greek, which is now the common language. So often when you want to go back and see, well, what did the Old Testament really look like? And what did that word really mean? You can go to the Septuagint version of it and say, oh, that is, that word is actually used there. So one of the key times when we do that is there's always this controversy about, well, was Mary really a virgin? And did that word in the Greek really means young woman? And you go back into the Septuagint, and it's very clear that in the prophecies, like in Isaiah, it's clearly meant to be a virgin, not just some young girl of marrying age. Okay, so that's what's going on down there. Now, in the north, you've got you got Seleucus, and then he gets assassinated in 281. And then the second guy who comes in is his son, and he takes the name Antiochus. the first. Okay, and he dies in 262, so he manages to live longer than his dad, and then his son Antiochus II takes over. Okay, so Ptolemy II and Antiochus II, these guys are contemporaries. Okay, so they're ruling at the same time. And they are bitter enemies. But in about 250 BC, Ptolemy sends his daughter, Berenice, over to marry Antiochus II. So she will marry him. Now, the unfortunate thing is he was already married. And he's got a wife named Laodice. Laodice. Who he kicks to the curb so he can marry Berenice and they can form this alliance. So she's obviously not terribly happy about this. And so to gain revenge on Antiochus, she has Berenice, and by the way, they have a child. Right? We'll put a little, I'll just put a smiley face there.
Who has a child?
Antiochus II and Berenice have a child.
Okay.
Laodice has them killed. So we'll change it from a smiley face to a frowny face because now it's dead. Okay?
I'm fully in the fun facts and swing zone here.
She also poisons Antiochus II. So she is really bitter. Okay? I mean, you know, woman scorned and all that. And they have a son. I guess they had a son before this. And his name is Seleucus II. And he will rule briefly in around 264. So when you read the verses, so why go through all of that? Well, read the verses again. The king of the south shall become strong, as well as one of his princes. Well, Ptolemy the first became strong, and then his son becomes strong. Right? He gains power. His dominion shall be a great dominion. At the end of some years, they shall join forces, for the daughter of the king of the south will go to the king of the north. Okay, yep, so that actually happens to make an agreement. But she, the daughter, will not retain her authority. Yeah, because she's killed, right? And neither he nor his authority shall stand, right? Neither he nor his authority shall stand, because he's also killed. But she shall be given up along with those who brought her, and with him who begot her, and with him who strengthened her in those times. So, so now you got Ptolemy II, I guess, and Seleucus II, who are sort of contemporary-ish. And we'll go one more set of stuff. But from a branch of her roots, her being Berenice, one shall arise in his place who shall come with an army and enter the fortress of the king of the north and deal with them to prevail. And he shall also carry their gods captive to Egypt with their princes and their precious articles of silver and gold. And he shall continue more years than the king of the north. Well, so it said this was Ptolemy's daughter, right? Ptolemy also has a son who is Ptolemy III. I guess we'll put him back here because he's the next leader. And Ptolemy III succeeded his father, and he decides he's going to avenge his sister's death. So he attacks Seleucus II, he comes up and attacks Seleucid II here in Syria. And by the way, he kills Laocoon in the battle. I don't know why she's at the battle, but she's at the battle, and he takes her out. And then he continues on over and takes over the capital. His spoils for Egypt include 4,000 talents of gold, 40,000 talents of silver, and 2,500 titles. These include some that were carried from Egypt by Cambyses, one of these Persian guys, from here up to Persia in about 280 years earlier. So he's taking revenge not only for his sister, but he's getting back at these guys for 200 years of fighting. And so he returns back down here, and he's going to take the idols with him. So two important things about this, okay? Who's in the middle of all of this? Israel. So as these two guys or dynasties, the North and the South, battle back and forth, they're going back and forth through Israel. Okay, so consider what Israel goes through during this period of time, because then eventually the Romans are going to come in and they're going to use Israel as a staging place. And as you start to understand a little bit of the history, it starts to make a little bit more sense why the Pharisees and the religious leaders of Jesus's time just want peace, right? They're so worried that Jesus is going to stir up the Jews against them, or stir up the Romans against them, that they're quite happy to kill Jesus to stay on the good side of the Roman. Because for 400 years at least, they've been this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And even in the Roman times, we talked about this, I think, last Christmas. Out of this Persian Empire over here, the follow-on is going to be this thing called the Parthian Empire. We don't really talk a lot about it in history, but you can go look it up. It's a rival empire to Rome. So Israel is still in this uneasy buffer state territory between all these great kingdoms. And in some ways, that's amazing because A, it survives as a national entity, which is God's hand in all of that. But it also serves as this crossroads of ideas and trade and travel. And ultimately, when Christianity comes along, it will be very easy to spread it from Israel, north, south, east, right? So that's one key takeaway, is just understanding Israel's kind of physical and strategic position militarily in all of this. The second thing is, if somebody can come into your country and beat you up and steal your gods and take them back down with you, you got the wrong gods, right? I mean, that's fundamentally, you should be looking at that going, hey, maybe my gods are not that great. I wonder if there's a better alternative. And you wonder whether people ask themselves that when that happens, but it does happen, and it does seem to be a big deal back in the ancient culture. So, okay, that's where I think we will stop for tonight. Okay, that sound good, Emily?
It does, yes.
Okay, so lots of history. We'll do some more history. Not next time, but not next week because we'll be gone next week. But 2 weeks from now, we'll do what is it, 20? What?
Yeah, I thought you were thinking about it.
We are, but we're not going to have Bible study next Sunday.
All right.
So on the 20th, we'll come back and do it again, and hopefully Dash and Lauren will be home too. And we'll talk more history, including the only time that we know of that Indian elephants went up against African elephants in a battle. All right. So
Cliffhanger to leave us on.
sorry, Emily.
That's a cliffhanger to leave us on.
Cliffhanger, exactly. And the point of all this is really not to give you, an in-depth history lesson about this. The point of this is, look what the angel's telling Daniel. Look what actually happened. And it should strengthen your faith in prophecy and the fact that God does know the end from the beginning. Right? So when we look at it and go, hey, well, gosh, actually that really happened, and it is, 300 years before it happens that the angel is telling Daniel, that should make us feel pretty good when God says other stuff is going to happen, right? All right, does anybody want to pray us out tonight? Ben!
Dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for all things for letting us be here every week. Pray that we all have a great week and
Amen. Thank you. All right, we'll stop this.